Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Progressive HR Live. I'm your host, Corinne Woodman-Hollebeck, and I'm here with Jessica Begley, and we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about building a future of work culture in a remote tech company. So I'm super excited for this live. And if you are joining us and this is your first Progressive HR Live, here's the rules. Go ahead and add your name and where you're joining us when you're streaming from. And we'll introduce you in just a minute. And this is a really interactive live. So if you have questions for myself or for Jessica, then go ahead and add those questions in the comments and we'll be taking your questions live in the flow of our conversation. So how are you doing today, Jessica?
I'm doing really well. Excited to be here. Thank you.
So, okay, audience, we're going to start with our questions for Jessica while you're going ahead and introducing yourselves. And again, go ahead and add your name and where you're streaming from in the comments, and we'll do some introductions after our first question. So, Jessica, in our recent LinkedIn post, you wrote that your team experience is living the future of work today. So, what does that mean? What does that mean to you?
It's a great question because it can mean a lot of things. I think when we think about the history of work, right? For hundreds and thousands of years, people were in person together, and the rise of a lot of tools and the internet has allowed us the flexibility to really be able to embrace the idea of remote work. Now, some people might have the posture that remote work takes away from some collaboration. But I think the reality is it's really about how do you set up your work environment in a way that's conducive to collaboration and connection, even while you're remote. And so we've done a lot of things at Very to build it that way. I can throw out a couple of the ideas. So one thing is we're a purely Slack-based organization. I'm sure lots of people listening today are thinking, yeah, we use Slack too. Well, we only use Slack. So we don't email each other internally, which I think is a really unique and refreshing idea. And the reason for that is when we do things within Slack and we have everything built in such a way that everyone can sort of see each other. And if you're jumping onto a project or offboarding from a project, you're able to see everything. And this is a way where we're all really connected. Another thing that we really believe is, so a lot of times, people are, they're in an office building, and a lot of times, for example, the executive team sits on a completely different floor, often behind some glass. You need a special key card to get in. The idea is that remote work can really democratize the workplace. So my team slacks me DMs all the time asking me a question. Same thing for our CEO, same thing for our CFO. And that change in access, I think, really makes people feel more connected with an organization. And same thing in all of our social Slack. We have a lot of us, at every level participating. So again, I think people feel more interconnected to different levels of the organization than they would necessarily in a traditional office setting.
Thanks, Jessica. I love that. So, audience, if you're just joining us now, this is Progressive HR Live, and I'm here with Jessica Begley, and she is a CPO, Chief People Officer with Very, an IoT company, and we're talking about living the future of work today, or living the future of work culture in a remote company. So, Jessica, I have another question for you, and then we'll probably get into some of our audience questions. How's that sound?
Great. That sounds wonderful.
So, on the vein of talking about LinkedIn posts, you had also added this as a comment to one of the posts that were out there on LinkedIn, or as a part of one of your very prolific LinkedIn posts. I love your content, and audience, if you're watching, go ahead right now and follow Jessica. She's got some great content out there, specifically talking about the culture or living the culture of remote work. So we talked about the remote work model, and you mentioned it transcending a Band-Aid of the pandemic. So how does the fully remote model transcend being a mere pandemic Band-Aid to becoming a catalyst for leveraging technology, innovation, broadening talent pools, and really unlocking a lot of new talent opportunities?
Yeah, I can't even understate this, because a lot of companies, right, before COVID hit, it was office every day, standard office hours, no one worked remotely. It was unheard of. However, there was no problem with people going home at night and then getting on their computer at night to answer emails or to continue working. But during that workday, you had to be in the office. When I started my career many years ago, I was always told, like, be in the office before the boss gets in and don't leave until the boss goes home. And that was really this idea, was about what you could see and what they could see. And I think, the pandemic forced everyone quickly, I mean, on a dime, to say, how do we do this remotely? And because of that, so many companies treated it like that Band-Aid. It's a triage moment. We've got to just make this keep going. We've got to get people continuing to work, even though they're not in an office. And what you've seen is those companies who treated it that way as a Band-Aid, what did they do? As soon as they could, back to the office. Because they didn't change anything in terms of the structures or the process to make it so that remote really worked for the company. They used it as a Band-Aid so that they could revert back the moment they felt that they could. But it's not a Band-Aid. It's a huge opportunity. And I think that for a variety of reasons. So one thing I always say is, I think that our company is richer in terms of her perspectives because our talent pool spans across multiple states, multiple countries. We have at some point had people up to 26 different states in the US. We've had people in 8 different countries. We've always spanned the Western Hemisphere because we've personally believed that time zone alignment is really important, because of the collaboration that we do still think is important. I always say to people, do not misunderstand. I'm not saying collaboration isn't important in the workplace. I think it's vitally important, but I think you have to change the systems that you have in place in order to make it work remotely. So that's why we stay in the Western Hemisphere. Time zone alignment, majority of the day overlap, so that collaboration is possible. But I think absolutely the talent pools are huge. The ability to find people in different places. I'm based in New York. For the majority of my career, I only worked with people in New York. There is a mentality in that. There's a mentality, even in New York, one of the most diverse cities in the world. There is a mentality of people who work and live in New York. Now I get to work with people with a diverse range of experiences and places. I think it just makes the workplace an unbelievably more rich experience. I think the other thing that it allows you to do is, it allows you to, for us, so we're client services, we work with clients. So we actually will have people geographically more centered towards specific clients just because we are remote. Here's another way to leverage it. Instead of necessarily having clients who are super far away, there's an opportunity to leverage the talent that's closer to those clients themselves. And then the other thing I think that's really important is, I think the ability to leverage technology in smart ways. If you ask anyone in our team, I feel pretty confident in this, they would tell you they feel like they have better connections to more people in the company than they ever had at an office setting. And it's because of the fact that they can just reach out. It's because of the fact that, physically in offices, it's usually you talk to the people on your team who are literally sitting next to you. You use the same refrigerator, you use the same water cooler, so therefore you know them, but you might not know the other people in other functions on other floors. When you don't have that physical obstacle, and you really have conduits in place to really make people reach out and feel connected, then you have the opportunity for people to feel more connected. So often we will have people who need help on something. We have a Slack channel for everything. They'll go into the Slack channel, they'll ask the question, and most of the time, by the time the subject matter expert goes to answer the question in the Slack, someone else has already answered it. Not a responsible party, but because they saw it and they knew the answer. All of these things are the ways that we can leverage tools and technology and the removal of obstacles physical within a workspace to really make people feel even more engaged, both to the people that they're working with and the work that they're doing.
And when you wrote, that's how we're living the future of work every day. We're living a future of work culture. That's one of the points that you're making, is that future of work culture, is it more intertwined because people are removing those barriers that they had in the offices?
I think so. I think people look, I think, wow, life is hard and adulting is hard and the pandemic made it hard. And I think in general, people really crave a few things. They crave purpose and they crave connection. And I've talked to a lot of people lately who, they've been, I hate to use the word forced, but we're going to use forced back to an office setting. And what they're saying is it feels really quiet in the office, like weirdly quiet. And a lot of people are, saying, well, it's because they didn't want to be in the office. They were forced to be in the office and now they have to be there for work. And none, like the world has changed, but that workplace hasn't changed. And so now people feel less connected than they did before to the people and the work. So, how do we leverage the opportunity of technology and working remotely to bring that back to people? You can feel purpose, you can feel connected to both the work and the people, but it has to feel different. And so, what a lot of companies are doing today is they're just trying to revert back. They're like, 2019 totally worked. We're going to do that again. And it's like, like maybe not. Maybe let's try something new because a lot has changed since then.
Reverting from our pre-created questions a little bit, and I was
Sure.
thinking about this because the Microsoft report came out that there's a lot of BYOAI, and bring your own AI to work.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
yeah. So as you're talking about the technology and creating community, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about how that's a big change. That's a big change from what it was. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people feel more able to do that because of the changes that happened with
Mm.
remote work. And I think they feel a little bit more like engaged to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Or they
Mm-hmm.
feel a little bit more like, okay, so I know the future of work is coming and I have to be ready. And my organization is still kind of thinking around this. So I think I'm just going to
Yeah.
do what I need to do to be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that, when we're talking about the community and purpose in the future of work, has to do with the idea of taking things into your own hands a little bit. What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, there's a lot there. AI. I mean, can we say a term any more frequently than AI lately? I think I think always learning new technology and not being afraid of new technology is great. I think the minute you start to get afraid of learning new technology, you're in big trouble because, right, the evolution continues. So, always great to learn. I find the people who are terrified of any model of AI, I'm like, well, have you tried it? And they're usually like, no. I'm like, okay, you should just go try. There's a lot of free models out there. There's a lot of options. You don't have to put in any personal information. You can just play around with it. On the other side, with any new technology, you definitely need to proceed with caution. So I think, and there's a lot of ways and stopgaps that companies are using to know, first of all, anytime anybody writes me something, it is very obvious to me whether a person wrote it or whether AI wrote it. I mean, it's not so I'm just going to say to everybody listening right now, like what I do with AI, and this is what I would encourage anyone to do. I usually use it for thought starters. So I'll
Mhm.
say, I want to do this, write me a set of questions that I could think about based on this. And a lot of times those are great thought starters. But do I use AI to write my LinkedIn content? No, because you know what happens? It writes exactly the same way in exactly the same format, is exactly the same out like everyone else. And you lose the humanistic component. And I'm in the people business. People and being a person is very important. So I think use tools, test them, try them, use them where they're appropriate, Don't use them for everything. They're also wrong a lot. If anybody's really played around, I love my chat GBT and I have the subscription service, but let me tell you, it's wrong a lot. It's wrong on even basic things like Google self formulas. So just use it, learn how to use it. Don't be afraid of technology, but also don't let it, don't use it as an insert for you as a human. One, it is not meant to be that. And two, be careful because it's not right. The other thing I'll say, anybody in HR out there, it's biased. It's very, very biased. So be careful. And gender is a huge part of its bias. And I've tested it several times with a couple of theories, and it is biased. So look, don't be afraid of technology. Test and try. Learn how to use it where it's appropriate, but proceed cautiously. Be thoughtful about your usage.
I like that. Use it, but be thoughtful about it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. And don't let it replace you, right? Like, I think,
Right.
Think about all the best ways that like you, and I find the older I get, the more I'm just me. Like, that's part of it. And the more me comes through and things. And so I think, that you are uniquely you are a product, right? You are putting yourself out there in a lot of ways and in a lot of your work product. So let it be you, because that's ultimately at the end of the day is what's going to help you differentiate yourself from others, is by being you.
Yeah. And so one of the points that I made in my TEDx talk was, and this is back a few years ago before the pandemic, is out of the 8.3 billion people that are on the planet, every single person is uniquely themselves. Mm-hmm. So when we compare ourselves to other people, or we say, okay, so-and-so writes so perfectly on LinkedIn and they have so many followers and they get so much engagement. I wish I could do that. So I'm going to use ChatGPT to do that. Well, if you stayed consistent with writing as yourself, even if you made mistakes, because that's uniquely you have your own, just like we have our own fingerprints, we have our own LinkedIn prints. And people can tell, and people want to connect with people. They don't want to connect with marketing. They don't want to connect with machines. They want to connect with people. And thank goodness, the pandemic just made that even more open for us to connect. I mean, we've never met in person, but we're connected. And I think, to your point about people being in offices, when you take out those physical barriers, even though it's 2D, you still have the face-to-face connection that Zoom offers you. And I think you do learn more about each other, and you do have more of a community based on your remoteness. So
absolutely. And I think so. I will say, I was at a roundtable a few weeks ago and we were talking about this. Some people were saying, but how do you get people on camera? Like, so many people just don't want to be on camera. And I'm like, it's not an option, and I think part of that is embedding those types of things in your culture early and often, reminding people, guys, we are a camera on culture because we want to see you. You're a human. You're not a box, and I think even just subtle notes like that, right? That can change the way that people can feel connected, to your point, even in a 2D space. You're looking at a human in their eyes, look, you might not know if they have legs. That's where in person is helpful sometimes. But you do want to be able to feel like you're talking to a human and not a box.
And I do believe, corporate culture has a way of taking out the humanness, because is everybody meant to wear suits? Is everybody meant to wear ties? Is everybody meant like that? If we're talking about people being their unique selves, corporate culture doesn't really, offer that up. It's more like, here is your little box and we want you to fit into that. But, we want you we're hiring you because you're a diverse candidate. You have different ideas, you have different perspectives. You'd fit really, you'd make a good ad. But we want you to wear, we want it to be blue, and you can't wear any earrings. You can't color your hair.
I mean, I think it goes even deeper than that. This is a whole other conversation. But so I came from a very large corporate entity, And everything I did, everything was my ID number. It wasn't my name. Everything was my 7-digit ID number. And so even I, in my roles, when I wanted to do something, I had to open a ticket and it was with my ID number and all of these things, everything was my ID number. And so I came to a smaller company because I was like, I'm done with ID numbers. I want to say people's names. So we actually don't use ID numbers. We just use people's names, because we are like, you are a human and you deserve to be called your name, and you don't need to have a number. Now, it doesn't work at all scales, and I totally appreciate that. But that's part of why I made the change. Is I was ready for when I called someone or Slacked someone, I just wanted them to see my name and knew who I was. And I do think there's also different arcs in your career where sometimes I'm so glad I started in a really large corporate environment. I learned a lot. I learned how those machines work. And after I really learned a lot about that, I was like, I want to go somewhere where it's small and it's broad and I feel like a human and I feel like I can connect with other humans. And I think it works for different people. One, it has to work for you. It seemed like big college, small college, right? Like people
Mhm.
like different things for different reasons and how you feel and what you're connected and what's important to you. But I think there's also a piece of different parts of your career can lend itself to different types of environments. And so sometimes maybe being an ID number works, and sometimes maybe being your name works.
Knowledge bomb.
I'm just saying, I
Doesn't
do.
have
I
to
think
be
I
for
think there's
everybody.
arcs. I think there's arcs, and I think at some points in people's career, it makes a lot of sense to be in one versus another. And you don't have to be one for life. You can be in different places and learn different things and gain different experiences. Um, and I know I certainly have.
Good conversation. I'm going to turn it back around to something that when we were talking, when we were doing kind of like our pre-rehearsal, you had said this, and I was like, I have never heard someone say this, and I think it's so true. And it was just opened up such eye-opening for me. We talked about how offices have facilitated the culture of poor communicators,
Mhm.
not poor communication, but poor
Mhm.
communicators. And you would describe it as, in essence, us versus the work,
Yeah.
us versus each other. So, can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit more for our audience about that? Because this just blew my mind. Because it's like, you're so right. You're so right.
I mean, there's a lot of layers to this, and we don't have time to go through all of it, but I think a few things. I think one, back to what I said earlier of, when I started in an office environment, I was told, I mean, not by my boss, by other people I worked with, it's all about visibility. It's when they can see you. And so you have to be at your desk for a certain number of hours a day, and you should be in before they get in and out when they leave and things like that. But also, what happens is people then just do the flybys, right? There's not a respect for the time, and so they just fly by your office, fly by your thing. I mean, I definitely had moments where people would like track me, and I'm like in the refrigerator getting out my lunch, and there's somebody standing right here saying something to me, or because they just see you, and so they start talking to you. And not that you shouldn't be available, and I love the opportunity to just casually speak with people, but I think what it's done is it has allowed a lot of managers to be more focused on, I see the person, that I'm really talking to them about, here are my expectations for you in this role. Let me define what those accountabilities look like. Let me describe to you how I plan to follow up with you on the things that you're responsible for. Let's talk about how we communicate around deadlines. Instead, it's the flyby, hey, did you work on that report yet? No, why is it not done? Instead of teeing up the whole conversation around, here's how we work. How do you like to work? How do you like to receive feedback? And there's so many components of that. And so people say, well, there's so many bad managers out there. Well, it's because bad managers are learning from generations of bad managers who all they thought was, let me just look at them. And if I see them and they're sitting at their desk, then I know that they're doing work. If they're not at their desk, they're not doing work. As a person who's never liked sitting at my desk as much as possible, I tell you, I was doing a whole lot of work, but you couldn't see me doing it because I was out doing the thing and working with people and getting some stuff done. Um, but that's definitely unique. And so I think same thing, like okay, so a person's sitting at their desk for 8 hours a day. Well, if they're spending half of it online shopping and responding to personal emails, they're not really getting work done. But again, it's about how are we teeing up the structures and components of communication that's really meaningful. Same thing for helping people to like grow. So that's like the management piece. Talk about the leadership piece. I mean, how about, I mean, I always talk to anybody who works for me and I'm just like, so what's important to you right now? What do you think is going to be important to you in your future? Because again, same thing, life arcs, types of companies, life arcs and what's important to you. I have somebody on my team who she's got two young kids, 3 and 1. Her work and what's important to her in her life right now is very different than it was a couple years ago. And by the way, it's going to be very different than it's going to be a few years from now. You know, I'm in a different place in life as a mom of an almost 8-year-old than I was as a mom of a 3-year-old. And so, what's important to you, and asking people, what's important to you? What are your short term goals? What do you generally think your long term goals are? How do I help you? That's conversation. That's dynamics. And again, I think so much of management now in this very like traditional physical manner is how do I make sure that they're getting their work done on time? And so that I, the manager, am not getting yelled at because they're behind or their work isn't good.
So I've got question. We talked about this change, and they say, I don't know who they is. It's like people out there. They say
People.
that humans are very adaptable. We're very flexible. We've been adapting in Darwinism and over the course of billions of years. But when you look at it, it's over the course of billions of years. And ultimately, when we're talking about work, and you mentioned bad managers who've learned from generations of bad managers, that doesn't
Mhm.
really show quick change. Like we're
No,
and we're okay, yeah, it does, but we have to.
it doesn't.
This world of work means that we need to change quickly, but yet we're not, and we're still stuck back in the 20s.
Yep.
But yet we're adaptable and we're flexible and we're capable of change as humans. Seems kind of oxymoronic or hypocritical of us.
Yeah, I was having a conversation the other day. Again, it was at this roundtable I was at, and um, there were a number of people at the table. And funny enough, I was actually on the younger side at the table, which I'm not that young, so that was a little bit surprising. But the topic came up of Gen Z. This was a hot topic, right? Gen Z, and there was a lot of people being like, and these are people, I just don't get them. I don't get them. I don't understand those ears. I don't like the way that they work and what they want. And I was just like, hold up. I was like, everybody. So I'm usually the person who sees things differently in any room I go into. And so this was no different. And I said, hold up, hold up, hold up. Let's rewind for a second. Most Gen Zers, parents, are of the working generation that was the first generation where layoffs were really a thing, right? Because if you think back historically, like layoffs were not a thing. That was like the company shut down. They didn't lay people off, they shut down. And so Gen Z is kind of that first generation who grew up with parents that they watched get laid off, and they watched less and less unicorns, and they watched all of these things, and they watched their parents go through financial challenges even though they were educated, they had good white collar jobs. And so what has happened? Gen Zers have the least amount of trust in workplaces of any generation. They are really, really focused on stability and very clear lines and boundaries. And they're focused on really making the world a better place.
Mhm.
Not necessarily making corporates better places, but making the world a better place. Well, where did this come from? Let's step back here for a second. Where did it come from? It comes from the environment in which they were raised and what they saw growing up with their parents. And these were a group of very, I think, forward thinking progressive people, and they were still getting frustrated. And I personally think that while we try to change, a lot of times we stay the same. And it's this idea of generation to generation, looking at the next one and making these assumptions. And it's sort of like, step back, Ask a lot of questions. I'm a big proponent of like step back and ask a lot of questions. So what's important to you? What are you looking for? What are you looking for from me? Let's set boundaries. Let's set the expectations. I'm not saying that I need to like bend to every person, because I very much say, look, here's how I work and here's what I expect, but let's find how we find that dynamic together. But yeah, I do think there's a lot of people perpetuating these ideas. And I think people really need a hard reset into, look, I think people are looking for different things from their workplaces. I think people also, you know, the ideas around concepts have changed. I mean, talk about paternity leave. Like
Mhm.
even just in the last couple of years, right? Paternity leave went from basically not existing to in the United States to, starting to exist. But I know a lot of people who have paternity leave and they don't necessarily take it. Because again, there's this piece of like, what is the visibility of that in the workplace and how are people perceived? We haven't shifted as much as we would like to say. Um, and I don't think it's a political thing. Like, I think, because I think there's just the idea of, people should be there and available for their families as their families grow and expand. But have we necessarily taken away some of the structural challenges around people leveraging the benefits that are offered to them? So I think we have a lot of work to do. And this is not like, trying to say that like everything is bad and everything is wrong, but we still have a lot of work to do for some of these things in order to really create positive change in work environments.
Yeah. So the title of the conversation is, the future of work, living the future of work in the culture. And Very is doing it very well as a remote company.
Yeah, we try. And look, we're not perfect. And I say that probably every day. We're not perfect. We don't do everything perfect. I never say we're perfect. But I think saying we're trying and trying new things and being able to test and try, you might fail, but you might also find something really incredible. And that's where I do think bigger organizations have a harder time, because they testing and trying is harder the bigger you get.
Hmm. Yeah, because it's the molasses rolling downhill.
Absolutely.
You start something at the top and it may get down to the bottom, or the game of telephone. You start a conversation at the top, and
Yes.
by the time it gets down to the bottom, it may be something completely different.
Absolutely. And that's where I think communication in general. So I own internal communications for our organization. And I think internal communications is one of those functions that people just completely overlook, but how critical is it? Especially, remote, large companies, small companies, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to feel like you are sharing your messaging appropriately through the organization. I've seen companies try to do cascades, and to your point, it does become the game of telephone when you were 7 years old. I mean, like the message at the beginning is not the message at the end. And I think internal communications is another great way that companies really can leverage resources to ensure that everyone is aligned and clear on the messaging. And by the way, I don't think that necessarily needs to be in like external PR speak. A lot of our internal comms is in very plain spoken, familial language, because people feel more connected to that. So it's like me writing a note to my friend, not necessarily me writing a note to the company.
No, I like that. And I agree with you. I think that you don't need to market to, well, you do need to market to your employees at some point, but I think it's better um, to be a human to your employees and not the corporate.
Totally. Totally. Well, example. So we had some meetings set up on the calendar and we had some things change. And so I needed to change them. And so I sent a message in our Slack channel on Friday. And I was like, hey, everyone. Seriously, this is what it said. Hey, everyone. Some things, as you all know, some things have changed. I'm going to, bullet one, cancel the current invites. Two, regroup everybody into new clusters. And three, send out new invites, in the new groups. And I'm going to do that by Tuesday. Give me a thumbs up if you've read it, and that's it. And that's where I'm saying, I think to your point, like it's not about marketing, it's just telling people what's going on. being really crystal clear in what's happening so people feel like they're along for the journey. But I just wrote it like I write a Slack message. I didn't need 3 rounds of edits and an approval by someone with a rubber stamp before it went out, which is what happens so much in internal comms, which is why it feels so dry and so like disjointed from a human, because it goes through all those rounds. We try to just communicate like we're talking, and just do that via Slack in a way that it's visible. It's visible to everyone, so they're just up to date and aware.
So I don't know if you saw that we had a comment that came in, and it said LinkedIn user on our end, but that's Jessica Bell, who is
Okay.
who is saying that she completely agrees with what you're saying. So
Awesome.
and and then Jessica also has to add, so true on the last point as well. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you so much. Glad you see it the same. Yeah, I just think like, it's kind of like back to the AI thing, right? Like people know me and they know my personality. So it's like they're not offended by the casual nature of me just telling the whole company, hey guys, here's what's going on, because that's how I talk to them every single day. It's every forum. I'm not deviating from that. And I just find it to be faster, more efficient, and it's not offensive. It's not an offensive thing, but it removes some of that like corporate speak and super tailored and unbelievably watered down to the point where you're saying so many words but you're not saying anything. Nobody has time for that.
Yeah, no, and we go back to the 2D-ness of being remote, and people not wanting to appear unprofessional, on screen, so they are a black box. Like people would rather see you in your hoodie eating cereal, and have talk face to face, and they're building something with you. They're building a rapport, and I want everybody to feel like that's really okay.
Absolutely. Now, we don't really do the hoodie and cereal thing because we're client facing. So there are some like boundaries. I've definitely worked on the engineering floor where everybody was in hoodies. I've lived that life too. So like, yeah, like this is like what I would normally look like on a regular day. But we do also, but I think again, it's about making us feel like humans, and just, one of the other things we do is we do a thing called catch up. I think before we did something called donut, where it just matches people in the org every couple of weeks to a different person, and you just do like a quick like meetup, and they're usually like 20 to 30 minutes, and it's just ways that people can kind of get together and chat. Again, someone you might not necessarily talk to every day. And it's always amazing to me because people are always like, oh my gosh, you get to spend time with you. And I was like, by the way, spoiler alert, you can always spend time with me. You just have to tell me what you want to spend time with me, and then we'll find some time on the calendar. But that's the best. That's one of the best parts about being at a smaller company, is you have the opportunity to do that.
Awesome. So we're wrapping up here. We've got probably about 6-7 more minutes, and I really wanted to get to the technology question, because you'd mentioned ketchup, donut, and I was going to say, hey, taco, talking about all these food related technologies. But first, Jessica had another comment that I wanted to quick tell you about. So this again is from Jessica Bell. I try to communicate with candidates, clients, and coworkers as human, even if I use AI. By default, my referral network grew organically, significantly, without that being my intention behind it. So.
I think it's huge. Again, I think, oh my gosh, I think people, because we use so many more screens, and because we like have changed the way, like if you think about humans and communities, it looks so different than it did, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? Just the way to interact, humanistically within your community. And I think people are like, oh, everybody just loves their phones. They just want to be on their phone all the time, or they just want to be on the screen all the time. And I'm like, I actually think that people are truly craving human connection. There's this like, the pendulum swing. I think there's this huge swing in people wanting human connection. And so when you are, and Jessica, great comment, when you're the human who actually responds to you, all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, like two-way dialogue. That's fantastic. I'd like to do more of that. Even when you're telling me no, even when you're maybe saying something I don't want to hear, They want to feel like they're connected to other humans. I mean, we all do. There's this innate component. Again, I go back to it. Like, and by the way, if anybody's into, whoa, we're going really off topic here, but blue zones and the concept of blue zones, what are blue zones in the world? Connected people with a purpose. That's it, right? That's
Mhm.
what drives people, and longevity is that. And so I think when you think about what really helps drive us as humans, it is those interpersonal connections. You cannot discount them.
No, I'm 100% on board with that. You community, purpose, a sense
Mm-hmm.
of self-care,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of well-being, and you feel the well-being because you know everybody is kind and supportive around you. That's a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
blue zones that are around that. I mean, it's not just the fish and the vegetables
Totally.
and the walking up down hills and
Shockingly
stairs.
not. I mean,
Yeah.
that's good too. Healthy diet and some exercise is good too. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And yeah, I mean, that's people just want to be with people and they want to feel like they're cared for. Now, I will say, I think well-being takes a lot of forms. And the other piece I will say is I think the people in my life who've actually cared the most about me truly have been the ones who've pushed me the most. So I think that's where I go back to the communication piece and management and leadership is, I do think the more that you can have people really understand who you are, what's important to you, what's next in your life journey, the more that they can appropriately push you to where you need to be. And it is that really old school mentality of, there's one definitive line of how you get promoted and what job follows what job. And, that's a really old school mentality, which by the way, has completely broken. I mean, it's completely broken. And that's why people are so frustrated is they're like, I feel like, I saw generations before me that it was like, you're a manager, then you're a director, then you're a senior director, then you're a VP, and it just goes in a straight line, and straight lines are gone. Straight lines don't exist and people keep looking for them, but they don't exist, which is why the communication is so vitally important, and having good people in your corner who are good communicators who can help you. And for anybody anybody who's listening who might be like, well, how did you get there? Well, I didn't follow a straight line. I wish I was smart enough to have devised the line I followed. I was not. I'm probably still not. I couldn't do it again if I tried. But I think, the biggest thing is find people who will push you, but be in your corner, to your point, like people who do care about you and want you to grow. Um, Push yourself. Nobody's going to push you as hard as you will push yourself. And try different things, try different types of companies, try different types of work. Believe me, I never once thought that I would be writing policies for 100,000 people as part of my job, but I did that before. And man, it taught me a lot. Didn't think that was something that I would really carry with me, but it's something that did. So, that variety of experiences and having people who pushed me to be like, I really think you should do this, even though I was like, I'm not so sure that's so interesting to me. But they pushed me to be like, you'll learn something from this, go do it. Those are the managers that really leave indelible marks into your career.
Thank you. I think I mean, you made so many great analogies there. The analogy, the creation of the analogy of like, let's look at corporations or let's look at companies or organizations as blue zones for people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no such thing as a straight line anymore. I don't even think that there's such thing, they talk about like pie-shaped skills and T-shaped skills. I don't even think there's a T-shape or a pie shape anymore. It's just this
No.
bunch of dots and
It's a
super
it's a
lines.
bunch of dots. It's a
It's a
bunch of
bunch of
dots, and you've got to be able to jump like a frog and leap pads. You got to be able to make them over there. And I think the thing I'll say is every time you're going to make that jump, just think about how what you have already learned and how you've already grown will help you on that next thing. Because if you're going to jump, you've got to have some foundation that you can reach back to be like, I don't know this, but I know how to do that. And I can take some of those things to help me learn the other things. They don't always have to be, direct, but they need to have some core components, because otherwise you really are going to feel behind trying something completely new. But you've got to have a couple of roots that you can kind of like lean into and be like, yep, I know how to do these things. And I know how, but one of the biggest things is I know how to talk to people. I know how to ask a lot of questions. I know how I like to learn new tools, back to a lot of the themes earlier in the call, all of those things will help you succeed if you know how to do them. The function matters less in those moments.
Agreed, 100%. So with that, we've come to our time now. And so audience, I wanted to let you know that we are taking a break for the summer. So will not have a live in June. We not have a live in July because everybody wants to enjoy their summertime off. And so we're also giving our entire company, organization, Progressive HR, all of our employees and our contractors the time off as well. And so wanted to let you know that our guests in August will be from HR Architect. So Matt LaFata and Erica Neese will be coming and talking about everything you wanted to know about successful HRIS implementation. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Jessica, thank you so much for being my guest today and talking about all your experiences in living the future of work in a remote company. And so thank you, Resourceful Humans, and thank you, everyone, again, audience, for joining us, and we'll see you in August.